everybody to the next part of our glove tutorial. So by now you should have one little finger. How exciting. I hope you've all got on okay with that and managed to work it up. I mean, it's honestly really, it is really simple. I think it's just some portions of it are just a little bit fiddly as we work along the fingers, but there's really nothing difficult. So we've got our little finger done, and what we're going to do now is, before we start the next finger, we need to just work a few rows, because again, if you look at your hand, and this is something that really you're not aware of until you come to knit gloves, you know, you just don't even, I didn't notice this, but the base of your little finger, if you follow your finger across like this, you can see that it's actually lower down than the base of your other fingers. So what we need to do is we need to pop those stitches back on the needle, and then we're going to knit just a few rows up to the point of where your next finger, your ring finger, actually starts. So back to our glove, and what we now need to do, leave all your ends. I always do all of the ends at the end. Because if you start, you can, if you want to weave them in as you go along, then by all means do so, but I tend to just leave them all to the end and then deal with them once you've finished everything else. And I'll show you how I go about that in the very sort of last portion of the tutorial. So the first thing we need to do is to pop all of these stitches that we've got currently on hold back on the needle. And this is really simple. All I'm going to do is just sort of pull the yarn up a little bit, and then you can clearly see your stitches. Once you've got that first couple on, it gets much easier. So I've actually got 44 stitches, so I'm just going to split them half and half. So I'm going to put 22 onto this one, flip it around, and then put the other 22 back on there. So we just work our way along, and this is where having a nice thin yarn for your waste yarn is really helpful, because it's much easier to get your needle back in because there's more of a gap there. That's 22. So what I do then is just flip that around, pull that needle through so that you've got all those stitches on that one. And you want the tips of your needle, you want to put these back on, the stitches, so that you've got the tips of your needles facing where your little finger is, because that's the start of your round. I mean, if you want, you could have a progress keeper on here, but you're working in this direction across. So this is going to be the start of your round. This is going to be the front of your work, if you like. So now flip it around and then just put the remaining stitches on. I find it easier actually if that's the other stitches are on the cable. So just find that first stitch under there and then carry on and put the rest of them on the second needle. Now the last stitch always has a tendency just to disappear. I mean, you can see it kind of, your yarn goes in there and then it disappears. If you just grab your tail and pull it, you'll see your stitch pops up. So keep some tension on that waste yarn and then you can easily see that last stitch. Okay, so we've got all of our stitches back on, and now you can pull out your waste yarn. Just keep hold of both of your needles like that and then pull on one end and your waste yarn comes out. Keep hold of your waste yarn, you're going to need it again. So there we go, we've got all of our stitches now back on the needle. Now what I need to do is I've got to obviously reconnect my yarn, and at the same time I've got to pick up 2 stitches at the base of the little finger here, just to stop any holes. Now I'll say straight away, I always have holes. Sometimes they're barely there and you could probably get away with not even you know, dealing with anything and it just weaving in your ends. Sometimes there is a little bit of a hole. I don't worry about holes in the base of your fingers here. And the reason I don't worry is because you're going to have a tail end of yarn, because this is where we're going to be reconnecting all of our yarn on each of the fingers. So we've got a nice, as long as you leave a nice tail of yarn, 8 inches or so, when we turn the glove inside out to weave all your ends in, any little holes can just be sewn up and it's not a bother. So don't worry, if you get a hole, honestly, it's totally fine. You can sew that hole up and no one will ever know. Now, we're going to reconnect the yarn. Now this is how I've kind of found the easiest method of reconnecting and picking up those 2 stitches that I need to pick up. Your pattern might tell you to pick up 1 stitch, 2 stitch, whatever it does. You inevitably, it will tell you, I'm pretty sure, I've never come across a pattern that doesn't, but usually it will ask you to pick up stitches at the base of the last finger that you've knit. So what I actually do is I pull out the back needle as if I'm ready to knit, and then if you sort of squash your knitted finger down that way, we can now see our work here. And this is obviously what's going to make the gap here. If we were just to start knitting straight across here, you can see straight away we're going to have a hole here. So this is why we're going to pick up 2 stitches along here. So I find it easier to turn like I have, like that, flatten your little finger out so that you've got this portion of your work facing you. And then if you pop your finger underneath like that, what I'm going to do is just pick up 2 stitches in this area here. This is not an exact science. I tend to do it, if you follow your V stitches here, you can see that this row is a complete set of V stitches. So we're not going to pick up anything here because this is complete. This one here, you can see, is sort of half a V. It turns into half a V. So the first one I'm going to pick up is right there. I'm going to go under 2 strands. You can see there's 2 strands here. You could pick up a bit further down, but then you're going to create quite a bit of sort of tension there. It might pull a bit. So I tend to go under 2 strands. So I'm going to pop my needle underneath, grab your yarn, leave a tail for weaving in and for closing any gaps, and then just loop it over, put some tension on it and pull it through. And that's the first stitch that I've picked up. And then the next one is I'm just going to go along from where I picked that one up, and again you can see that this column here is a full stitch, but the one next to it isn't. It kind of divides. So again I'm going to go in there under 2 strands, make sure I'm not knitting with my tail, yarn over and then pull that through, and that's our 2 stitches picked up. Okay, so now we can just carry on knitting. So that first stitch I'm going to pull quite tight on the yarn. Get your tail out of the way, pull quite tight on the yarn, and then also pull quite tight on the second stitch, and then that should help close any gaps as well. And now you can just carry on knitting. So just follow your pattern. It will tell you to knit either X number of rows or 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, whatever it is. Just follow your instructions and just work those few rows. In my case, I've just got to knit 3 rounds. If I say rows, you know that I mean rounds, don't you? So you can now just carry on and work in my case, 3 rounds or however number of rounds you need to get up to that point of starting the ring finger. Your tail end that you've got here, just roll that up and tuck it inside your glove. If you have it outside like this and then you start working around, it's going to be on the outside of your work, which isn't a disaster. You can just stick it on a tapestry needle and pop it back through. But if you just remember at this stage, it saves you having to do that. Just pop it inside your glove. There we go. So I will see you for the next tutorial when we're going to be dealing with the ring finger.